No, Princeton Pike. And so 50%, we're going to be...
Good day, and we thank God for this opportunity to be before you, to share this panel, to share expertise that's being presented by those who are with us on today. So we thank you, and here's what we're hoping is going to be the takeaway. Number one, that you are going to reclaim your health. You're going to better understand who you are and whose you are as a result of God's creational intentionality. So the panelists today bring a unique skill set they have achieved in their own rights, and they're here today to share that information with you. So I'm going to ask you to put your phones on mute or silence them, to bring yourself into the room and be very present. And again, we just thank you for being with us on today. Please enjoy.
Good morning, and to some of you online, good afternoon or good evening. My name is Dr. Anthony Lewis Fields, and I am Senior Director and Team Lead of Strategic Collaborations at Bristol Myers Squibb. We are here joining you live from Enon Tabernacle Church in Philadelphia, where we are experiencing the inaugural Women Know Your Numbers Health event. And what an experience it is, right? The women of Philadelphia are showing up on this fabulous fall day, and here to meet with them, are our many community partners. We have Penn Health, American Cancer Society, Einstein, LabCorp, of course, Bristol Myers Squibb, and many more. So the goal is for us to understand the importance of knowing our numbers. So while we are here, we will be here until 6 p.m. today, and we encourage those who are online to please join us. First, I want to give thanks to Pastor Waller, Dr. Alyn Jo Waller, and Reverend Miles for their visionary leadership. They have a holistic way of approaching and improving the health of the community, and they do so in a way that is designed to create sustainable change. I also want to thank all of you for joining, and I hope that you will find this conversation encouraging, informative, and providing the right activation energy that will help you to reclaim your health. Whether you're talking about yourself in the third person, her, or whether you're talking about your loved one, we want you at the end of this panel to commit to reclaiming her health. Why? Because we don't need to hear the statistics to understand them. Women, we have unintentionally pushed our health to the limits. We've done so because we are the primary drivers of the health care of our loved ones. We are driving aggressively our work life. We are driving hard for the causes that we care about. And the past 2 years have given us many causes to drive hard for. So what that means is we're driving longer, we're driving faster, we're driving harder, as well as the fact that we have more people on board in our lives. And unfortunately, when we think about African American women, we traditionally don't have a robust pit crew to wave us over, change our tires, refuel us. And one of the things that I have learned about pit crews is that there is, in every pit crew, a member that is responsible for sitting up high. And what they do is, from their vantage point, they will communicate and strategize with the driver. So the driver can understand what's going on and come out with a strategy for a win. And I would say that some of us don't have that particular person in our life, or some of us do, but we're not paying attention to what they're saying. And others, I think, hear the voices, understand, we get that unction, something is not going well. But because we're driving so hard to meet the needs of others, we suppress that voice and we continue to move on. How many of you can relate to this? Yeah, I can as well. So in 2015, I had transitioned to a new company. I was commuting 5 hours a day to get to that job. But let me tell you this, I see some of your faces. I had a 5-year-old girl and a 7-year-old boy. 2015 was 2 years after Trayvon, and it was the year of Ferguson. So I needed them in a place that I trusted. And so I was driving hard. And what I was not doing was paying attention to that dashboard. I had entered the age where I should have gotten screened for various ailments, and I didn't. But at a certain point, I realized that my actions were counterproductive. Driving harder, longer, faster, with the people that I loved on board, and choosing not to look at my dashboard and make some corrective changes just did not make sense. So I'm here to tell you today, and I'm so thrilled to present this panel to you, because I want to say women, BMS, Enon, American Cancer Society, Penn Health, Einstein, they're all waving you in. We have assembled a pit crew. Our community partners are here. They're here to screen your vitals, and our amazing panelists are here to provide some information that will help you to strategize how you want to move next. And information is power. So now, let me introduce to you some of your pit crew. We have Ms. Jamil Rivers, walking in fabulously. Ms. Jamil Rivers is founder and CEO of the Chrysalis Initiative, metastatic breast cancer survivor. Hello, gorgeous. We have Dr. Chinita Hughes-Halbert, all the way at the other end. Vice Chair of Research, Professor, and Department Chair of Population and Public Health Sciences, Associate Director for Cancer Equity at the University of Southern California. She is the first woman and the first African American from South Carolina elected to the National Academy of Medicine. President Barack Obama appointed her to the National Cancer Institute Board of Scientific Advisors. And can I also tell you that Dr. Chinita flew into Philadelphia a few hours ago to join us today, and she's going to fly out in a few hours from California. So we are so thrilled to have Dr. Chinita with us. Next is Dr. Derek Xavier, Co-Medical Director, Mainline Health Cancer Services, and Medical Director at Lankenau Medical Oncology Program. And as if that wasn't enough, he is System Division Chief for Hematology and Oncology for Mainline Health. And if he looks familiar, Philly, he was also Philadelphia Magazine 2022 Top Doc, Dr. Derek Xavier. We have Dr. April Sorrow, who is Senior Trial Physician, Clinical Research and Development Lead for Multiple Myeloma at Bristol Myers Squibb. So thank you all for being here, and thank you all for the information that we're about to share with our panelists. So I'm going to start. So Dr. Hughes Halbert, you are Professor of Population Public Health. I'm directing this question to you because I want to level set everyone on the disparities that impact African American women. We know that cancer, for example, impacts everyone, but it does not impact everyone equally. And given that African Americans have a higher incident mortality rate for many cancers, much of the work that's going on is aimed at improving the lives of people in the community. So can you provide what those statistics are, and what out there gives us hope that we are moving in the right direction?
Yeah, thank you. Well, first, I just want to start by thanking you for the opportunity to participate on this important panel, and for giving me a chance to come back home to Philly. I was here for a number of years and worked with several folks in the audience, so it's really fantastic for me to be back home. So what do we know about disease risk and outcomes, particularly among African American women? Well, we know that cancer and cardiovascular disease are among the two leading causes of morbidity and mortality across the population, and those statistics are relevant for both men and women. What I think is really important for us to take away is that while we know about those as being the two leading causes of morbidity and mortality, there are also really important things that we can do to minimize our risk and improve our health through our behaviors. So watching what we eat, eating a healthy diet, being physically active, managing our stress are all things that we can do to improve our health care and health outcomes. Part of the things that I think is also relevant to our conversation today is the importance of being screened for risk factors, for being screened for different chronic conditions, which we know are risk factors for morbidity and mortality from cancer and cardiovascular disease. So early detection through mammography for breast cancer is essentially important. Prostate cancer screening tests are critically important for men. Having a colonoscopy is important for all of us, but it's important for women in particular, as is lung cancer screening. So we'll talk about more of those during the conversation today, but some of the things that I think is really important about events like this is that if we know our blood pressure, if we know our HbA1c levels, then we have a sense of what's happening inside of our bodies and how we can sort of start to begin to take control of the behaviors that can manage those chronic conditions. So what do we need to do to live a healthier lifestyle? That includes eating more fruits and vegetables and being physically active. And I know for all of us, we're sort of getting back on track, I think, from being, from going through a global pandemic where we were forced to be inside. But now we can, I think, begin to get more outside. Starting a walking program is one of the most effective ways to get physical activity. One of the projects that I was really excited about working here in Philadelphia is did collaboratively with my colleague Brenda Bryant, who is here in the audience. One of the things we really focused on was trying to implement ways that people could be more physically active, sort of in small chunks. And so I'd like to just offer a couple of strategies that we found and really resonated with individuals who joined us in our program. One was exercising in small chunks. So if we know the recommendation for physical activity is to engage in at least 150 minutes of moderate intensity physical activity per week. So how are you going to do that? What we recommended and what we found was that people could start a walking program, could exercise in small, like 10-minute bouts, and could do things such as walking sort of cutting, using sort of mixing and parking further away from the entrance to a shopping mall or to your place of employment. So those are some really, I think, straightforward things that we can do to be more physically active. There are lots of important programs here in Philadelphia that are designed to improve access to healthy fruits and vegetables. I miss the farmers markets that are here in Philadelphia, and so those are some of the things I just want to share with you.
It is very important for us to be able to take care of ourselves proactively because we do have people who are dependent on us, and we understand that, and we want to encourage you to live that best life. And I think, Jamil, it's very obvious that you had reason to live. Like it was very clear. Your life mattered. There was no one else to 3 critical people but you. So can you share with us your story and encourage the folks what happened when you first found out that you were diagnosed, and how did it feel and when you were looking at your children and your husband? So can you share that story with us?
So my husband had already gone through a liver transplant and colon cancer diagnosis. So I thought I was going to be the healthy one. I was the typical married mom of 3. And when he was diagnosed, our youngest had just been born. So he was literally a baby, only a few months old. So they didn't really have the memory of what he had to go through with chemo. And luckily, he's doing fine today. But it was a total shock 6 years later, being diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer. So breast cancer that was already stage 4 from the start. And I didn't have the traditional lump as a symptom. We had the kids are back at school, and of course all the colds are lingering in the house. And my turn came and my cold didn't go away. So I was just constantly coughing, and, I went to my primary doctor and I said, well, what's going on? I've had this cough now for a month. So she then prescribed an antibiotic. That didn't work. After a couple weeks, I went back. She prescribed an asthma pump. I still was coughing. So I then just asked for a chest scan. I said, well, can I get a chest scan? And I also asked for an ultrasound because I felt a little pinch on my side. It wasn't painful, but it was something that I had never felt before. So fast forward, going to go get the chest scan, they found that I had a spot, a shadow in my lung, and also lesions in my liver. And so, of course, I felt absolutely fine besides the cough, and I'm wondering, well, what's going on? And so more testing and a biopsy, and it was confirmed that I had metastatic breast cancer, that it had already spread all over my body, except for my brain and my spine. And my youngest is in kindergarten at the time. So I'm thinking, why would God bless me with this beautiful family and then strip me of them or strip me from them? Who's going to be there to take care of my family? So I was absolutely devastated. I'm automatically thinking, is this terminal? And, I went to, a local cancer center here, and she said, well, it doesn't mean you're going to die next week, but we do have a whole floor upstairs of young women with metastatic breast cancer. And I had never received my mammogram before. I was under the age of the recommended age of at least 40, I think it was at the time. No strong history of breast cancer in my family. And so was really just struck by, I now had so much to learn. I did not know that breast cancer was so complicated. So I had metastatic, de novo, hormone positive, HER2 negative breast cancer all over my body. I did seek out a second opinion to make sure that I was getting standard of care that was recommended. I ended up staying with the cancer center that initially diagnosed me and ended up getting 1 year of chemotherapy. I had also, since my breast cancer was hormone related, I actually think that my breast cancer was derived of me having a miscarriage a few years prior. And I remember going to my OBGYN at the time because I had breastfed all my boys, and that right breast was always the overactive one. So when I had the miscarriage and the right breast hadn't gone down back to its normal feel, my OBGYN at the time said, well, I'm not too concerned. You really don't have too much breast cancer in your family or anything. We know that's always been the overactive breast, and it's probably just a blocked milk duct. And I also had a history of fibrocystic breast, so meaning that the texture or feel of my breast would change just if I had caffeine or cheese or dairy or whatever. So I really didn't think too much about it, but when I was diagnosed with breast cancer, my brain automatically went back there. So I knew that my cancer was driven by hormones. I also advocated for myself to have my ovaries removed because I thought, well, why have the mothership, still feeding the cancer? I've had my kids, let's, remove my ovaries. And I got a bit of pushback about that because they typically don't recommend that. But I've, continued to press for, I didn't want my cancer to build up that drug resistance that is typical sometimes. And so I just thought, let's, kill the mothership, let's remove the ovaries. And they ended up doing that. And with 1 year of chemotherapy, and also I think because I had my ovaries removed, I was able to reach no evidence of disease. And so I'm still living with metastatic breast cancer. I do still have to get my scans. But at least, it's one treatment at a time, one therapeutic at a time, and just making sure that I'm being monitored closely. So I do get my scans every 3 months. I do follow research very closely. I recently learned that if you're able to identify a specific mutation that's known for progression prior to it becoming a tumor, that it doubles the amount of progression-free survival. So I pressed on my team to now monitor me for that mutation every 6 months. And I think it's really important for, Black women in particular. I was under the recommended age. Most of us don't know that we are diagnosed younger. We typically are diagnosed more metastatic or more advanced with breast cancer. And so it's important for us to know our specific individual risk based off of our family, based off of, family history, based off of even pregnancy, having that in mind when we, as part of our reproductive health, getting those genetic testing to make sure that we don't have any specific carriers or mutations or biomarkers that could make us more likely to be diagnosed with breast cancer. And even if there's not breast cancer per se, but if there was prostate cancer in your family or any other cancers, I think it's important for us to start being screened for either that genetic testing or mammograms 10 years prior to any known diagnosis in the family. So meaning if your grandfather or father was diagnosed with prostate cancer at, 55 or 50, start getting those mammograms on your end for yourself, for your own individual health at 40. But know that Black women, we tend to be diagnosed younger. And so even if it's not a lump or it's a feel change or a texture change or skin change, that is also something that you want to bring to the attention to your doctor. And a lot of times there is a challenge where, preventative mammograms are covered by, your insurance or even Medicaid or Medicare. Sometimes it won't be covered unless you have a strong history in your family if you're under the age of 40, but there are resources locally and nationwide that you can reach out to make sure that if that barrier is the health system themselves, that you can actually penetrate that and get the care that you need. Also, it can be a bit daunting because after that first mammogram, there's a number of different tests that you have to get after that to confirm what type of cancer you may have. And then also just the biopsy and the ultrasound and the MRI. Black women are also more likely to have dense breast, and we typically don't know that either. So it's really important for us to make sure that we have that knowledge, because knowledge is power, and making sure that we can access whatever it is, the layer on of testing and the layer on of information that we need in order to make sure that we can have the best possible outcomes. And so even if you're feeling overwhelmed or challenged with that, there's organizations like the one that I launched, like the Chrysalis Initiative, that can really literally wrap our arms around you to make sure that you move forward with whatever it is you need to make sure that you have that reinforcement.
Thank you so much, Jamil. Isn't that, empowering? That's empowering. And that was in 2018. And while Jamil was just rattling off the science, Jamil is an accountant. And what that means is that anyone who is invested in learning about what they're dealing with, what their body is doing, you can learn. There are plain language summaries that the FDA requires that each drug maker provide so that you can understand. And also, as your best advocate, you are entitled to sit there, and even if you don't understand, saying, I don't understand, and no one is going to move you until you understand. And there are resources like the Chrysalis Foundation that will accompany you. So you never need to go through this alone. So Dr. Savior, you're a head and neck oncologist, and we see the FDA approving earlier treatment for earlier stage diseases all of the time. And we know that the guidance, and Jamil touched upon this, about how initially the age in which we start screening was developed on a population. Now, who do you think the population was based primarily of? Exactly, white men. So now we're aware of some of the differences, as Jamil pointed out, but can you talk to, number one, how we should start to understand our family history so that we can have conversations with our doctors and push and advocate, as well as what those, the various treatment options that are coming to the market and how that is impacting the longevity of survival.
Thank you for allowing me to be on this panel. I really appreciate it. So this is church, and I don't know if this is proper or not, call and response. So I think we're kind of talking around people. What is cancer? I want to make sure we understand what we're talking about here. We're throwing a lot of terms out here. I want to make sure we're all on the same page. So if somebody can tell me what cancer is, really quick. Anybody? Abnormal growth of cells, exactly. So our bodies are made up of trillions and trillions of cells. Each cell has a purpose and a function, and once that function purpose is done, it dies, and it's replaced by a normal new cell. A cancer cell is only a normal cell that has been changed on a genetic level. Everybody's heard of DNA, right? All right. Every cell has DNA. The DNA is like the computer code of a cell that tells a cell what it is, how long it's supposed to live, and when it's supposed to die. When that change in the DNA happens, that cell now becomes cancerous. It no longer does its job. It now divides uncontrollably, and it starts to go other places. So cancer is just a normal cell that has been changed on a DNA level to now becoming abnormal. And that one cell becomes 50, and that 50 becomes 1,000 and 1,000,000, and it grows. And that's what happens. That's what cancer is, an abnormal growth of normal cells that has been changed by some type of insult, radiation, chemicals, environmental exposures. Sometimes we have genetic changes that are passed down from families to families and families. That's where the family history comes in. So it's important for us when we're talking to our patients, we go through a whole litany of questions. Has anybody in your family ever had cancer? Was your mother or your father? Was your grandmother? So we can try to determine patterns, right? So if your grandmother had breast cancer, your mother had breast cancer, you have breast cancer, there may be something on a genetic level that's been passed on through your family. And if you have daughters, it's important for them now to get their mammograms earlier. So family history is extremely important. How do we treat cancer? So there's different ways to treat cancer. So we can cut it out surgically, all right? We can give radiation, which radiation is high-dose energy is like localized, like a laser beam. You point it in one direction, what location is going to kill the cells in that one location. So it's localized high-dose energy that's going to treat a localized area. Chemotherapy goes through the veins, and it's a systemic therapy, meaning it goes through the veins, it's carried by the blood. So wherever the blood goes, the chemotherapy goes. So it travels all over, and it kills cancers by either disrupting that abnormal DNA or something abnormal protein in the cancer cell and kills the cancer cell that way. Unfortunately, cancer cells are rapid dividing, so chemotherapy kind of targets that. We have other cells in our body that are rapidly dividing also. That's where we get the side effects. Our hair follicles are rapidly dividing. We're always growing hair, right? So people could lose hair. Our tongues are, every time you eat something, you're insulting your tongue. So those cells are rapidly dividing. So we can get taste alterations. The lining of your GI tract is rapid dividing, so you can get nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. There's a whole lot of things. The bone marrow. When you break up the chicken bone, that brown spongy part in the bone marrow, it's called the bone marrow. The red blood cells are made there. If you have chemotherapy, the fact red blood cells become anemic. The white blood cells fight off all the bacteria and fungi and viruses we come in contact with. So chemotherapy can affect that. Also put us at risk for infections. So chemotherapy is kind of a dumb agent that not only kills cancer, but can also affect normal body tissues. That's where we get the side effects. Now we're into the realm of, you've probably heard this personalized therapy, right? So we can look at cancers now on a genetic level and specifically target these mutations and give you an agent that specifically targets these cancers. Now we may be hearing some immunotherapy. You hear it all on TV now, immunotherapy. So our bodies develop cancers all the time, right? We do a very good job of clearing those cancers because we have these certain white blood cells that go through our white blood, our body to detect and kill cancer cells. So what immunotherapy does, it kind of revs up the body's own immune system to detect and kill cancer. We also have something called targeted therapy, which is a pill we can use. If you have a certain mutation, that pill targets a cancer-specific mutation and kills the cancer cells directly. So we have a whole armamentarium of agents to kill cancer. So my job as a medical oncologist is to determine what type of cancer you have, what stage you have, and which the chemotherapy or radiation or surgery option is best for you. But it's a back and forth conversation. So we have to consider like side effects, how long, some people's like, Doc, I don't want to lose my hair. But Ms. Jones, if I give you this chemotherapy, yes, you may lose your hair, but it may save your life. I get a lot of pushback for that, actually. So it's a conversation we have. But I also tell the patient that you're the most important person in the room. I have to explain everything to you in order to get your informed consent. I can't do anything to you or for you unless I explain what the possible benefits are and the possible side effects are. Only then can I have you sign the informed consent for me to proceed. But you can't sign informed consent unless you're informed. So it's a conversation we have, and I'm educating the patient as to what we're doing, okay? So not only am I treating the patient's horrible illness, I'm also trying to educate them and their family members to order, so we can, come to some type of, agreement as to what the goals of treatment are, how we're going to go forward, and to make sure that everybody's happy and everybody understands what to expect and hopefully get the best outcome. I can't cure everybody, right? A lot of cancers are caught late. If they're caught earlier, you have a chance for cure. That's why screening is so important. Mammograms, colonoscopy. The reason those are important because if you catch a disease earlier, the curative potential is higher. I'm a lung cancer specialist, and unfortunately, lung cancers are generally caught later. And why that is by the time you have symptoms, it's already generally spread. Okay? So I need to know if you're like losing weight, coughing up blood, those type of things. But by the time that happens, unfortunately, it has gone somewhere else, and I can't cure everybody. So if I can't cure you, I want to do two things. I want to try to extend your life significantly, see your granddaughter graduate from college, another family reunion in 2 years, go on a cruise with your husband. But I also want you to live well. Quality of life is equally important. So I want you to live longer, and I want you to live well. So that's my job as a medical oncologist, to try to achieve those things. So I hope I answered your question. Thank you.
You sure did, right? And so again, I'm hearing self-advocacy, because we don't necessarily want the first dumb agent to be used on us. When there are tests that can be, that they can use to identify exactly what those DNA mutations are and what are the right drugs that will target your type of cancer. Okay? Dr. Sorrell, clinical trials tends to make people uncomfortable. They don't understand them. And even I would think that, is it the last line of defense? Is it the last option for us to go to? And based on what Dr. Xavier was saying, perhaps it's not, and you're going to explain why, but how you're treated initially starts to change your body, and it changes your body's receptivity to downstream treatment options. So can you share with us, number one, help us understand not all, but some of the advancements that have been made to ensure that people are safe on clinical trials, and give us a better context for truly what it is. And because I think that there's some misconception that it's experimentation. Can you share that?
Hi everybody. Yes, thank you for the question. And before I talk a little bit about the safety element, I just want to provide a little bit more context about clinical trials. I think that one of the things that we have to think about when we think about clinical trials and drug development is that if you look back 50 years ago, and you think about the types of treatments that were available to people, we had, as Dr. Xavier was talking about, predominantly, just surgery or just radiation or just chemotherapy, and only, a small number of chemotherapy treatment options. And through the years, over time, with research, with clinical trial development, there have been opportunities to expand the number of drugs that are available to a larger number of people with a lot of different types of diseases. So a larger number of cancers, a larger number of diseases, and that's really important. And so I think that that's how clinical trials sort of are helpful, in that they can bring hope for better therapies, more targeted therapies, something that's more specific to someone's type of cancer, especially if it's a harder cancer to treat, where there aren't as many treatment options available. So I think it is important in terms of context to know sort of how clinical trials can kind of fit in to the treatment landscape and how they can offer hope for people. I do think, though, that clinical trials are scary. It's a scary concept. Because there are several different kinds of clinical trials. There are some clinical trials that are being done using drugs that are already available in the clinic, already available in the hospital, already used on people. But the reason that the drugs are in a clinical trial is because maybe they've been developed and used for people that have leukemia, for instance, but we don't know whether or not they will work very well for someone who has breast cancer, for instance. So maybe there's something that the drug targets that is an underlying gene that is important both in leukemia and both in breast cancer, but the drug has been given for leukemia patients and been very successful there, but it's never been given for breast cancer patients. And so you have to, if you're going to try to find out whether or not that drug can work for someone with breast cancer, you need to research it. You need to study it in a controlled scientific fashion to make sure that that drug that worked in leukemia is also effective in people with breast cancer. And that you also study the different side effects. Just because a drug that might be on the marketplace is effective and safe for people that have leukemia doesn't mean that it's going to be just as effective or just as safe in people that have breast cancer. So that's why that drug would need to be studied in a clinical trial format in order to better understand whether or not it is safe in a new group of people with a different type of cancer. So those are some of the kinds of clinical trials that are out there. There are other clinical trials that are trials that we refer to as being earlier phase trials, or trials that are first in human trials that are fully experimental, in that these are new drugs that have been tested on animals. The science says that the drug probably would work very well in humans with certain kinds of diseases, but it's never been given to humans before. Those are the drugs where the potential for side effects is the highest, and the types of side effects that can develop are really not fully known. You know, you have maybe a little bit of a hint or a clue because of the kinds of side effects that the animals had in the laboratory, but that doesn't really translate to human beings, right? So those are the drugs, the early phase studies, like the first in human studies or the phase 1 studies, where the risk of having an unknown side effect is really the highest. So there's a range of different kinds of clinical trials, and some of them have more of an experimental component than others. But why is it important to consider a clinical trial? It's important to make sure that you have all of your tools in your toolbox for treatment. There are times when the best treatment option for you is the drug that's already available in the clinic, in the hospital, and not on clinical trials. And that might be the best option for you, especially at a particular moment in time. But there are other times when the best option for you that would give you the best chance of a longer life, or even a better chance of cure, is something that is new, something that's more targeted to a biological pathway that really hasn't been around for as long. And so that's something that's a conversation, you know, with your physician, with other people in your community, like advocacy groups, et cetera, to help inform those kinds of decisions. I think the other thing that is really important to know is that we, especially as an African American community, have not a very good history when it comes to clinical trials and research, you know, with in multiple different ways, Tuskegee, et cetera. So we have a pretty concerning track record, and I think that is a really important thing to acknowledge, and I think that it's also a really important reason why knowledge is power, why it's really important to know a lot about the different kinds of clinical trials that are out there, to work very closely with your physician to make sure that you understand, as Dr. Xavier was mentioning, the type of trial that you might want to participate in, and whether or not you feel that it is a trial that's being done responsibly, with good scientific questions that make sense, and a trial that has certain safety mechanisms built into it, to make sure laboratory studies are being done, physical exams are being done, tests are being done to look for how safe this drug is in a particular person. There have been some additional measures put in place to help protect patient safety, like through the federal government. There's some regulations in place. There's some oversight in place of the pharmaceutical industry. There's oversights in place both federally, but also there's oversights in place at individual hospitals and hospital systems, oversights that we refer to as IRB boards, or institutional review boards, which are boards of people that are made up of, you know, physicians and other healthcare providers and even community members. So it's a great opportunity to help support protections in clinical research by participating as a community member in these IRB boards at hospitals. But these IRB boards are really devised to take a look at the clinical trials that are being offered at that hospital and through those clinics to make sure that they do meet certain standards, that they are ethical, that they are appropriate, that they don't seem to be abusive in any fashion. And so that's one of the safety mechanisms that's involved in trying to keep people as safe as possible. Also, in terms of the pharmaceutical companies' responsibility for safety, we have responsibilities for safety. There are legal responsibilities for safety as well. So, and I know that for our clinical trials and clinical trials by other pharmaceutical companies, we usually use data monitoring committees, which are independent committees made up of physicians looking at the side effects and safety profiles of various different drugs throughout the clinical trial. So as a clinical trial is being run and patients are enrolling in the clinical trial, there's data monitoring committees that are taking a look at the side effect profile of that particular therapy and doing it on a regular basis, like every month, every couple of months, to look for any sort of signals or concerning signs that maybe it's that combination or that therapy is just not safe enough to be given to people, and that needs to be shut down. So there are mechanisms in place to help with safety, but I think that one of the most important things is self-awareness, knowledge is power, working with your physician, and knowing yourself, knowing your body, and being informed. And even if you decide that a clinical trial is a good option for you and decide to participate, that doesn't mean that a decision that you make today is something that's binding forever. If you ever find that the therapy on the clinical trial is just not working for you in terms of the side effects, that it's just too much and it's just not something that you think is beneficial for you anymore, you can always stop with no questions asked. So there's a lot of complexity to it, but your oncologist is really a great resource, as well as a lot of the societies, the breast cancer societies and leukemia societies, etc. I hope that answers the question to some degree.
Absolutely. And they're strong advocates for the patient as well. So when we were talking about even phase 1 clinical trials that are conducted in animals, what percentage of our gene do you think we share with, let's say, a non-human primate, like a monkey? Anyone? 99.9%. 96% of our genes are shared with a cat. 60% of your genes are shared with a banana. You have 60% genes in common with a banana. Okay, so that is why when we're thinking about how can we use an animal as a model for a human, is because of the genetic similarities, and you're focusing in on certain pathways that have been shown. It's a good model to explore your drug's behavior. So I did want to give us an opportunity to talk about next steps, because if everyone can take a minute or so to talk about what you think we all need to do so that we can close that health equity gap as Black women. Because I know that once we get those marching orders and we are invested in it and we know the benefits of it, we will make it happen, right? So if we can start with Dr. Hughes Halbert, if we can talk about it from the, because you were an advisor to Obama on the infrastructure changes. So can you share what infrastructure, how everyone out there can advocate for infrastructure changes that would help facilitate getting access to the health care that they need?
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a really important question and an issue, and I'd like to talk about it in several different ways. So there's infrastructure that relates to where and how healthcare is delivered. There's the infrastructure around where we live, and those are being described and discussed now as social determinants of health. And this is something that I think is really important because we're all paying attention to where and how we live and receive health care and how that influences our ability to get early detection and screening tests. It affects our ability to get good primary care and have access to high quality treatment for cancer and other conditions. I think one of the things that we have to do now is, one, with respect to the infrastructure of healthcare, is for all of us to begin working together to advocate for increased coverage of tests. As Ms. Rivers was talking, I think one of the things that was really resonated with me, because I also have a family history of breast cancer, and the extent to which providers sort of know about and give value to starting screening, at a younger age that might be recommended for women in the general population who don't have a family history of disease is really variable. So I think that in addition to sort of providing greater coverage of those tests for women who fall outside of the range of sort of the population-based approach to screening is really important. I think related to that, we have to do more to educate providers. Dr. Saver is really has a fantastic breadth of knowledge, but I think that there's variability in what providers might know and understand about screening recommendations and disease risk and outcomes in specific populations. And I think that level of knowledge, how cancer risk factors are different or the same, and how screening behaviors are the different or the same, specifically in our community, I think is really important to bring that knowledge into the conversation, into the healthcare setting. So those are the things I think that we have to do from addressing the healthcare system. So we need to have better focus and attention on addressing and getting people into the healthcare systems and getting greater coverage for care. I think related to that, I think when we're in the doctor's office, there's a lot of ways in which the nurses and the physicians are influencing and directing care. But really, in my mind, the ways in which we manage our sort of healthcare overall happens outside of the clinic. It happens where we live. It happens where we go to church. It happens outside of the hospital setting. I think related to sort of building that bridge is we need to have more interactions where that if someone has difficulty with housing, has difficulty paying their electric bill, have difficulty getting home from their visit, those are the things that providers and healthcare systems need to pay closer attention to and need to have the resources available to connect patients and caregivers with those sources so that those issues, those social determinants, don't reduce someone's ability to come back or to adhere to the recommendations that were given in the clinical setting when they leave. So I think there's, to sum up my comments, we have to work to improve our care in the clinical setting. We have to have more conversation about the things of that, where we live, how we work, where we go to church, how that's influencing our ability to follow through with the recommendations. So we have to address more social determinants of health.
Absolutely. And so what stood out for me amongst many things that you've said is that there's variability in knowledge. So be empowered to challenge and ask for additional information and not everyone has the latest and greatest. Because when we go to these scientific conferences, we're learning new information all the time. The speed of science and that change in scientific knowledge is rapidly growing. So, Dr. Xavier, can you talk about some tangible next steps as it relates to advocating for the most innovative care, the most personalized or targeted care, and how we can empower those that are listening to be their best advocates in that realm?
I think the key word there is advocate. You have to advocate for yourself. You have to advocate for members of your family. So we just came through, we're still dealing with the global pandemic of COVID, and what struck me, and we saw a lot of news stories about how, especially black women, to present it to the hospitals, complaining of shortness of breath, not able to breathe, and a lot of the medical professionals kind of poo-pooed it, didn't give them prompt care, didn't believe what they were saying, didn't believe the magnitude of their symptoms. So a young lady, that sticks in my mind, young lady comes, she's a physician, went to the hospital complaining of shortness of breath, dry cough, classic COVID symptoms. You know, they had her languishing in an emergency room, and she died there. They didn't give her standard of care. They didn't think that she, her symptoms were significant. And she was a physician, advocating for herself. But there was still a barrier there that she did not get the proper medical care, right? And we see that all the time. We see that all the time. You have to fight for yourself. You have to fight for your loved ones. You know, when I come to a room, I always tell people the patient is the most important person in the room. All right? I listen to you. I work for you. I work for you. When you're telling me something, I have to, absorb it and, act upon it. If you're saying you have pain, I have to believe you. The pain may be a marker of something else insidious going on. If you're saying you have some other type of symptom, I have to believe you. And if I don't believe you have to push back. Like, I'm telling you, something is not right here. So my charge is, if something is not right, you have to fight for yourselves and fight for your families. Some doctors have a God complex. Not many, mostly surgeons. Well, don't tell me I said that. But you really have to go into this situation. You have to, what are your recommendation? Why is it going to benefit me? All right? You have to explain it to me like I am in the second grade. Don't use medical jargon. Talk about physicians. Make sure they don't use medical jargon. And is this the standard of care? Is this experimental? Do I have any other options that may be beneficial, that may be a cheaper alternative? Less invasive alternative. So that's our job as medical professionals, to ensure that you understand our recommendations. Again, informed consent. I can't have you sign something saying that I agree to this procedure unless you're informed. You can't come to a decision unless you're informed. So my biggest thing is, I'm really trying to pound on the table, you have to advocate for yourself, because it's so very important. And I also want to say something about clinical trials real quick also. So clinical trial is a scary, scary topic when you think about it, but actually it's not. So the pace of medicine is rapidly increasing. All these scientific development, all the pharmaceuticals spend billions and billions of dollars, to make up the newest and greatest innovation, but they have to make sure it works, right? When you look at the medical, so our job as physicians is, yes, obviously to treat patients, but also to make sure that we're up to date on all the medical advancements. So we get 1,000 journals that come through the mail. We're meeting with people all the time. And when we look through the medical literature, it tells you, like this first graph on there, who was this agent or medicine tested in? All right. So these are these innovative, potentially life-saving medicines, and it tells you who on this trial had access to this. In general, like 2 to 3% of these patients are only black. That's criminal. All right. Our families have to have equal access to these life-saving medications. And it's my job as an oncologist to make sure that my patients have access to these agents that are going to potentially extend their life or even save their life, right? So I have to explain to them, yes, it's experimental. It's been tested before, obviously, to get to this point. However, I would not recommend anything to you that I would not recommend to my own mother. It's very important to build that trust. And that's why I think it's very important that we have to make sure we have other, doctors of color come up after me. It's very important. We have to make sure we increase that pipeline to improve the, black doctors in medical schools and nursing physicians. It's a dire, dire situation. In this country, about 300 million people, there are probably about 100 black oncologists. And probably half of them are descendants of slaves. So there are a lot of them like from Africa, but it's like probably only black oncologists. 300 million people in this nation, 100 black oncologists. That's criminal. So we're the people in the front line, treating your mothers, treating your father, treating your grandparents. We have to improve that pool. So we have to improve the pipeline. We have to get our kids interested in STEM education, science, and mathematics and engineering. It's it's a dire situation. And I'm sorry for getting on my soapbox.
No, we appreciate that. We want to hear that. So I'm going to give the last word to Jamil, if you're okay, Dr. Sorrell. What are some of the takeaways that you want everyone to walk out of here with? What they can do?
Say that the most important thing, of course, is this knowledge is priceless, meaning that you know what to go home with to protect yourself, your family, your loved ones, how to be empowered for the best care for yourself. I think you have a lot of good information as far as just, what is my family history? What is my personal risk? What is my coverage, right? And then also, how can I access if there are any gaps? But I also think it's important for us to know that we're going into a biased healthcare system. So meaning, even if you have the best information for yourself, you are going to run into some barriers in the form of bias at times. Sometimes that is where you're not able to access what it is that you know that you need, or you have to trust and verify the information. I think that's a perfect question to ask your oncologist to say, okay, well, this is what you're recommending to me. Would you also recommend this for your mother or your sister or your daughter? And see if, it's consistent. And then also just getting that second opinion, tapping into resources and information to advocacy organizations like ours. And I mean, it's great to advocate for yourself, but I also know I've been there when you're first diagnosed. It is very overwhelming. And sometimes you are going to need, just that additional support to get through it. And then you can help the next person behind you that is going through it as well. So there's nothing to apologize for or nothing to feel shameful about if it is just too much jargon, if it is too much information. And sometimes you might not have a wonderful doctor like Dr. Xavier, where you're going into these spaces and they don't know us. We are foreign to them. We are the other. And so it's that much harder for them to, just value you. And we know as Black women and Black people that sometimes we're disregarded. And so, that should not be the case. And your zip code or your skin color should not dictate the type of care that you're supposed to receive. So even if you need some others to fight with you and advocate with you, you are not by yourself. You are not alone. I think that's the biggest thing, to tap into that individual fortitude that you need to make sure that you're good. Know going in that these are spaces that might not be the most optimal. There could be some bias there, but you still have resources on your own and that you can tap into to make sure that you get the best possible care.
Thank you so much. I just want to leave you off with this, and that is, imagine you learned that you were supposed to get $100,000. But when you went to whatever office it was, they only gave you $75,000. However, someone else went to the office and they got their full $100,000. What would you do? Would you just let them keep the $25,000? I wouldn't. And so every year, every moment of your life is yours, and it should not be reduced due to structural racism, environmental factors, someone not having the bandwidth or the space and time to focus and ask those questions of you. You need you, your family needs you, grandchildren, generations, and sometimes you have no idea the plan that was meant for you, whether you're 99 or 25. The years that were allocated to you are yours. They are your $100,000. No one should take your 25 and give someone else their full allotment. So we need to get screened early because it gives us an opportunity to get the best treatment out there. We need to advocate for our health, whether it's individually or we're partnering with an amazing foundation like the Chrysalis Foundation. And we need to change our understanding of clinical trials. We are due the most innovative. My son could stand online for a pair of sneakers because it's fresh off the market. You know, clinical trials provides you fresh data or fresh treatment that is right on the market. And if the other things haven't worked or are not ideal for you, there's an opportunity for you to identify what is right for you. So I thank you so much for your participation, for listening to us. I want to thank my panelists, Dr. Hughes Halbert, Dr. Savior, Dr. Sorrell, Ms. Jamila Rivers. I also want to thank our partners, the American Cancer Society, particularly Paula and Kate. Thank you for your partnerships. Also, I want to thank NAL Speakers Bureau, WOSIP, and blackdoctor.org. I want to tell you that this panel will be re-aired on blackdoctors.org and will also be re-aired on essence.com, so please look for that and share the link so that we can get this information out to as many people as possible. Because, again, that $25,000 is yours, and you, your family, or whomever else you decide to give it to need it, okay? Thank you so much, ladies, and know your numbers.